Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day. Welcome to our Big Book 12-step workshop. I invite you to join me in the prayer for an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. We're going to take a look at column 4 tonight. We've been spending our time looking at column 3, who has annoyed us, who has irritated us, who has created anger in us. What did they do? And how did that affect us? I'm moving ahead earlier than I would normally move. I'm going to try something to see if it helps people have a more effective experience with column 3, because they will have had some exposure to the column 4. We took a pause on the column 3 work last week and looked at Bill's suggestions for the removal of deep resentment. Now, the big book on page 65 indicates that the suggestion is to do that particular work after you've completed column 3. So just to be clear with you, I'm also going a little bit in conflict with the big book suggestion, giving you this tool for the prayer practice while you're actually looking at column 3 and before you've completed it, or maybe even had a complete experience with it. But again, I think in the anticipation of and the use of a tool for the removal of deep resentment might actually facilitate the unpacking of column 3. Similarly, I'm moving ahead on column 4 for the same reason. On page 67, that very first paragraph, it doesn't refer to column 4. It doesn't even talk about resentment, but it is apparently the final suggestion for the completion of the resentment analysis. I'm using that term very pointedly. Column 3, the way I approached it, the way I was shown how to approach it, all of those 7 variables on the left side of the worksheet, it's very analytical. It's very in your head, looking at how these various aspects reveal our beliefs about reality, who I am, who they are, how life works. And the key word there was should, revealing our beliefs. Here we're going to take a look at what I've called the 4th column. You'll note on page 65 there is no 4th column, but this is the final instruction on step 4. So in concert with the big book 3 columns on page 65, I'm just going to use the terminology column 4. It says we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. That's the way the paragraph ends with regard to completing the prayer practice. And there are some words in there that you will note in the prayer, if you've paid attention to the prayer that I have crafted, that's in the Way of Life document in between the column 3 and the column 4 worksheets. Referring to our list again. So he gave us that comment, that suggestion in approaching column 3 and the deep resentments, taking a look at the column 3 list. That's what we're referring to here in the big book. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. So we're not looking at them anymore. Columns 1, 2, and 3, we're looking from the outside to how it impacted us. Now the only perspective that we're going to use is looking from the inside. What is the source of my reaction to people and circumstances on the outside? The key here is my reaction. We resolutely look for our own mistakes. So in column 4, we're looking for our mistakes. He doesn't tell us what that means yet, but he's going to give us 5 questions. You remember on page 62, he said selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of the problem. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of the problem. And from that came resentment. And from that comes fear. And from that comes dishonesty and unhealthy sexual relations. So we're getting to the root here, the exact nature of the problem by looking at the various forms of self. Where had we been selfish? He asked us the question, assuming that we're going to answer that question, but he doesn't give us a definition of selfish. Dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. So let's take a look at the word self-seeking. He doesn't give us a definition of that. For our purposes here, and I'll go to the worksheet in a minute, but I want to just unpack this paragraph first, and then we'll go to the worksheet. I use the definition for selfish as thinking about myself. In contrast to self-seeking is how am I acting on my own behalf. Selfish is my thoughts. Seeking is my behavior. It's arbitrary. I'm totally making up those definitions. Actually, I didn't make them up. The man who took me through the steps the second time gave me these definitions. But then he asks about fear. Where are we frightened? Where are we dishonest? You'll see in the worksheet that I give a definition of fear. That feeling we get when we're going to lose something that we want or not get something that we want. Dishonest, misrepresenting myself. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, so he's putting it in a big perspective, seeing the common sense of it. We tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Again, he's asking us to take a look only at our reaction, not at their motives, not at their actions, not on their impact on us. We're not looking at them. We're not looking at circumstances at all. We're looking at our own thinking, our own feelings, our own behavior. Where were we to blame? I don't personally like that word. Blame, it might have been a proper word in 1939 where it had some meaning that didn't have such negativity. But I like the word responsible. So I use that in the worksheet. Where am I responsible for my reaction? The inventory is ours, not the other person's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. Notice the words he's using. Faults, mistakes, wrongs. We're taking responsibility for the very first time. So let's take a look at the worksheets. You may want to just look at the column 4. Well, I guess I can put that up on the screen, actually. So this is what the worksheet from column 4 in the Way of Life document. One of the things the men who took me through the steps suggested very strongly was that I say a little prayer at the beginning of each worksheet. Not just at the beginning of sitting down to do the work, but at the top of the page to write just a little prayer. So I have on each of the column 3 and the column 4 worksheets, before you begin the worksheet, write and pray a personal version of the set-aside prayer, just to stay in companionship with the Spirit as we go into this. When I resent Bob for trying to get me fired, I'm looking at the worksheet now on the screen, or the worksheet in the Way of Life document. I have a belief about my role. I'm coming out of column 3. And so I have a belief that I've now identified, my self-esteem and my pride. I'm very clear concerning this belief that I'm exempt and unique and entitled and special. I'm not proud of that. This is the first time, shockingly and embarrassingly, I'm aware of it. But when I'm looking through that belief, I have all these reactions in column 3. And I ask myself my perceived role. What is my perceived role when feeling this resentment? I believe I am. There's some examples here. Put yourself back on the stage. What's the role you're playing in this drama of your life? I have some examples there. Now, don't get lazy with it and just pick one of those examples. Really, these are just samples to show you the kind of illustration. Are you the misunderstood person, the betrayed spouse, the abused child? Just to give a dynamic to a variety of roles. Well, in this case with Bob, I'm the misjudged employee. He thinks I'm no good. I think I'm superior. So when feeling this resentment, I believe I am superior. That's my perceived role. I'm a superior employee, the only eligible person for this promotion. We've gone through that. I'm assuming you remember parts of that. But remember in the prayer, it said fancied or real. Here's where I bring that in. Is the event itself true or false? Did Bob actually try to get me fired? Well, yes, he did. So it's not about the feeling, it's about the event. My feelings are always real. My feelings are always real. The feeling itself, they may not be based on reality, but they are my feelings. In this case, is the event true or false? The event itself, it's true. It did happen. As I mentioned, I believe earlier in prior presentations, fancied or real applied to about 5% of the resentments that I had, meaning that they didn't have any basis in reality. That may or may not be your experience. So disregarding the other person or entity, could be an institution, involved entirely, consider before, during, and after the event that was or is the occasion of this resentment, because it might be something that's happening right now, or it happened yesterday. So it's very current, as was my case with Bob, or it could be, as was the case with my father, decades earlier, at least 3 decades earlier. And in fact, in the last decade, he was dead. So he wasn't even around for 12 years, but I still had this vibrant resentment. So we're disregarding the other person or the circumstances or the institution entirely, and we're looking inside ourselves at our motives. That's the term I use. You can see it at the top of the worksheet. And it comes from the Latin movere, to move. And motive means, what is it that moves us? What's the value or the benefit to us of holding this resentment? And with that mindset, with that pair of glasses on, we look at the 5 questions. The 5 questions that I started out the presentation talking about from the big book on page 67. You can see there are the first 5 issues here, the first 5 numbered worksheet pieces. Self-seeking, acting on my own behalf, behavioral. I put the self-seeking before the selfish. It's easier to look at behavior than it is to look at that subtle motive. At least it was for me. And it seems to be for other people. Acting on my own behalf, self-centered behavior. When I feel this resentment, when I had this resentment toward Bob, how did I behave? I ignored him. I was sarcastic to him. I went around him. I disparaged him to my bosses. I misrepresented myself to my bosses. Selfish, thinking about myself. Remember, I made the distinction between thinking about sexual behavior. So the selfish, in contrast to self-seeking, selfish is just about my thoughts. Thinking about myself, self-centered thoughts, motives, and attitudes when I feel this resentment. I'm thinking about myself because I'm the center of the universe. At least up until that point, I had that thought without being conscious of it. And I wanted that appointment to be the manager of the Los Angeles office, not because I could help the office or the people, but so that I would have the power and the money and the prestige that went with it. I knew all of that unconsciously or semi-consciously up to that point, but I had really conned myself into the thought that I was a Renaissance man and I would be the best candidate to help the company as well as help the people. That actually didn't really enter into any of the components of my motivation as I began to unpack them, doing column 3 and column 4. This column 4 was the very first work I did in 1988 that began to crack open my total set of delusions about myself. And I do believe that's the beginning of my spiritual awakening, meaning the change in me. It cut away all of this false foundation that I had and allowed me to begin to think a little bit more humbly about just being one of many people. It was a process, it took time. Dishonest, misrepresenting myself. Think in terms of, we talked about the instincts back when we were looking at the beginning of step 4, fight, flight, and freeze. That freeze instinct is a camouflage instinct, to hide. I translate that very easily into dishonesty, misrepresenting myself. I represented myself as a nice person. I wasn't. I represented myself as a enlightened person. I wasn't. I represented myself as a competent person in terms of management. I wasn't. I was a competent salesperson, but those skills don't translate into management. And I had never made that connection. Afraid. That's that other instinct. Fight, flight, freeze. Flight instinct, to run when in fact we're looking to survive. And that is literal in terms of the running to save your skin if you're being chased by a dinosaur in the old days. But it's really also a metaphor where we're hiding. We're running and misrepresenting ourselves as something that we're not. Where am I wrong, at fault, to blame? Those are words from the big book. But as I mentioned, I put the word responsible there. That's not in the big book, but I think it captures the meaning of what Bill is trying to get us to see here. And that is taking full acknowledgement that this anger energy is coming out of me as my reaction. People and circumstances don't make me angry. They are the circumstances that I allow my reaction to create my anger. My reaction creates my anger. Here's where I apply the then and now history to. That is the original event, for instance, with Alan Roman, who I haven't mentioned, I don't believe, in some of my comments to you. That was 8th grade. And he broke my nose. That was one of my resentments. But when I actually looked back at the history, looking at when did the event take place and what were the circumstances in 8th grade, I saw that we were on a football field wrestling as 8th grade youngsters do. And he had me in an awkward position. He dominated me, even though he was smaller than me. I didn't like that so much, and it was uncomfortable. And I referred to his race and his heritage and his parenting in a not so polite way. You can read between the lines. Well, he brought his hand down in a fist and broke my nose. I blamed him for breaking my nose. His breaking my nose was not a condoned act. It wasn't appropriate on his part. But once I saw that I had created his reaction, I had created with the stimulus of my racial comments, then the resentment went away immediately because I took responsibility for being the stimulus to the response. It doesn't condone what he did, but it certainly explains it. In contrast to now, I'm looking at Bob, all right? And I'm trying to figure out what's going on with Bob right now. And what I'm seeing is my past history has caught up with me. 17 years of drinking, 4 years of sobriety, but during those 4 years, I had not changed. And I was still a manipulative, dishonest, inconsiderate, unkind, megalomania, for want of a better word, which I'm sure you could put other words to, having heard many aspects of my description. But now here's where I think the worksheet gets really powerful and effective. These are additions. They're not in the big book directly, but they're work surrounding some steps that we're going to be doing in the future. This man who took me through the work the second time had a great knowledge of the big book, and he knew that in step 8, it says we made a list of people who we had harmed. We did so when we took inventory. So he puts down some questions concerning harm here so that we get clear here in the 4th step so that we can later on have these pieces of information to have an effective 8th step. Since we're in the midst of looking at the resentment from a couple of different angles, take a look at, did I create any harm? There's a lot of misunderstanding in the rooms, as I see it, that resentments create harm. That's not necessarily true. I had lots of resentments in which I had no harm done. And I had a lot of harm on my 8th step where there was no resentment. So harm is a very specific term, which means what was the negative impact of my behavior on them? What was the negative impact of my behavior? The harm is not my behavior. The harm is not my thoughts. The harm is not my feelings. The harm is not my behavior. The harm is the impact of all of that on other people. That's an aside, but again, this is about being specific with the harm to the person with whom you have a resentment. Is there any harm here with Bob? Well, Bill in the 12 and 12 gives us several ways of taking a look at harm, and they're all listed here: physical, emotional, financial, mental, spiritual, or any other negative impact. It doesn't mean that you're going to fill in every one of those. Those are just prompters. In Bob's case, it was only emotions. Yes, I wasted his time and I created stress in his life, but there were none of the other items in this list. Physical harm is pretty straightforward. Financial harm is pretty straightforward. It's about money. Mental harm, that's about distorting reality, for instance. The word in our culture today is gaslighting, where people misrepresent something so well that the people who are receiving the misrepresentation begin to doubt their own sanity. Spiritual, I can't see very much of spiritual harm because it's really about interrupting somebody's relationship with God or with higher power or with the universe in some fashion. It's possible, and we can answer questions, of course, about that. But the three major harms here, and we're not analyzing them, we're just placeholding them. We're listing them so that when we do our 8-step, we go back here and we say, oh yes, I need to take a look at the level of financial harm that I created in a particular situation. And the same with question number 7. Question number 6 is about harm did I do to the person with whom I have the resentment. But what about other people around that resentment? Collateral damage. So my coworkers and my bosses. And all I did was make that note: coworkers and bosses. Take a look at that when you get to the 8-step. This is not a place to do a lot of analysis at all, or a lot of walk down memory lane at all. This is where we make a note to come back to when we do the 8-step. That's why a solid recommendation to people not to burn their 4th step after they do their 5th step or get rid of it in some fashion. Keep your 4th and 5th step notes until you finish your 9th step, because you will, in the process of creating the 6th step, you will take a look at the character defects, question number 9. And in creating the very next piece of work that we will do, the fear inventory, I put a question in there for number 8. Is there any additional fears? Question number 4 up above is a straight out, what is the primary fear in this resentment situation? But there might be additional fears, like a fear of making a mistake, a fear of public humiliation, a fear of tall and powerful and intelligent men, a fear of really good looking and intelligent and articulate women. Those were real for me back in 1988. And I could see that all of that was part of the reason that I drank in preparation to go to a party or to a business meeting or at a business meeting, to try to release and reduce that tension that I had, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't measure up, and that I would be publicly embarrassed. Obviously, with the drinking, I was publicly embarrassed many times. List the character defects. So it's again a preparation and a parking spot, a holding spot for the 6th step inventory. The 6th step on page 76 doesn't ask us to make a list, but it does ask us to be willing to ask God to remove those. Well, it's my reading between the lines that says I should have a list. I should have a list of character defects if I'm going to be willing to have them removed. We'll get there, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But this is a preparation. And when I looked at the character defects, that was a pivotal piece of information that I began to intuit as a result of this analytical work from column 3 and column 4 that really helped nail the coffin of the fourth step, the fourth column responsibility. When I began becoming aware of the character defects that I enumerated earlier, my inconsideration, my lack of kindness, my manipulative, my corrupt motives. And then the question, again, not in the big book, but it's come out of the workshops where we want to try to help people, again, have a new experience with taking responsibility. Taking a look at this resentment that I had for Bob was pretty straightforward. It was a current thing and it was very visible, impacting my current life. But how come I'm still angry with my father? I'm 48 years old. I'm 4 years sober. I've been in therapy. He's been dead for 12 years. What's up with that? How come I'm still seething in lava hot anger? Why do I hold on to this resentment? What is the motive or the benefit or the value to me? Motive, I've mentioned the benefit or the value. And a lot of people will, before they give it much thought, they will go, oh, there's no benefit to it. Well, actually, there must be. Because you're holding it and you've held it for a day or a week or a month or a decade. And there are people on this call that have a resentment toward their mother and their father from when they were children, the participant in the workshop. So they were 10 or 8 or 15 years old, and now they're 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 years old, and they still have this seething resentment for their mother or their father. Well, I mean, I can understand it. I had it. But what's the point? What's the benefit to you? Oh, there's no benefit. It's a resentment. It's going to make me drink again. Well, yeah, but you have the resentment. Why are you holding it still? Why are you unwilling to release it? Or even if you're willing to release it, why is it still with you? So these are not throwaway lines. These are not light touch lines. These are very thoughtfully crafted questions that we take into our hearts and souls in the set-aside attitude with the set-aside prayer. What's the motive, the benefit, the value? Well, quite frankly, and I had enough sobriety and enough therapy and enough psychological training to say it was a total projection. As long as I can project onto my father the deficiencies I have in life, then I don't have to take responsibility. I can blame him. I can be a victim. Now, was that conscious? No, not at all. But that's the whole point of defense mechanisms. Those 9 defense mechanisms I believe we talked about before. They're unconscious reactions for survival, unconscious, and here we're penetrating the unconscious because we're digging under the surface. We're digging under our thoughts and our feelings, trying to come up with the source. Where did they come from? And so at the top, I said, my perceived role was a superior person. That's how I came out of the third column with. Byron Katie calls this the turnaround. She doesn't come from psychology. She doesn't come from religion. She doesn't come from 12-step. She had her own experience of bottoming out and rising out of the ashes, if you will. And she wrote a book called Loving What Is. And after you do column 3 and column 4 work and become awake to the power of it and the experience of it, and then you read her book, it totally reemphasizes and confirms the work that we're doing here. I'm not suggesting the book, but had it brought to my attention doing a workshop on column 3 and column 4 by some people who were trained by her. And they said, oh, you've done Byron Katie's work. And I said, no, I don't even know who she is. So they gave me her book. And it was wonderful confirmation of the human methodology here. Because this is who we are as human beings, not just as addicts. That gives it some additional energy. But it's the human part of us that creates all this mischief in our life. So rather than the perceived role of this superior person, my realization is that I'm an unrecovered narcissist. I mean, that's the bottom line. I used probably different words at that time. I wasn't as clear as I am today. But I was a totally self-obsessed person. And everybody around me was furniture in my life to be brought in or thrown away, depending on its utility to me. They were just collateral damage if they got hurt. And I had no attachment to it. That's cold. I thought I was a Renaissance man, and I found out I was a Neanderthal through doing this work.
Just to unpack this step 4 of column 4. So remember, the chair was silencing me. That was my resentment in meetings, and he yelled at me.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So when I resent the chair for silencing me and yelling at me in meetings, my perceived role is, was this right? I'm an abused board member?
Yes.
Okay. Or am I a knowledgeable giving board member who's helpful and loving and knows?
No, that's your self-esteem.
All right. So
from
that's
third column.
Okay.
No, I'm an abused, misunderstood, mistreated board member.
Okay,
Yeah.
Behaviors. I spoke out of turn. I interrupted the chair. I shouted at him in the chat, "Stop bullying me." That was in the chat. I complained and gossiped about him to other board members and to other intergroup members. So I baited him. Attitudes. It's just the attitudes. Where am I calling for? Okay, so this is like, those are the bad behaviors. So the thoughts and attitudes, I hate him. I want to show that I'm a better chair, more knowledgeable. He's a bully. Those were thoughts.
Yes.
Okay.
And I can show him up also.
Right. Oh my gosh, I was so into that. Okay, dishonest. I may have lied or exaggerating when complaining about him to others.
Yeah.
About what really happened in the meeting. Like I might have exaggerated to my other friends.
Sure. And I'm dishonest with myself because I'm an unruly board member.
Wow, really? Okay.
Well, that's what you said. I talk out of turn. I interrupt.
Yeah, but there was a righteousness.
Oh yeah. I guess if you're righteous, then you can be rude.
Oh my God, this is so hard for me to swallow. I'm going to have to do this a couple times. Okay, 4, afraid. What was my fear? Fear of not being seen, fear of not getting what I want. I want the community to have a good example of Robert's rules and have it being done properly. I'm righteous. I'm going to teach this dude.
Yeah. No, you're a pain in the ass. But anyway, go ahead.
And maybe I even humiliated him. I don't know. But
yeah, you probably did. You really certainly annoyed him, right?
I annoyed him. He seems unhumiliatable, if that's a word.
It is now.
I want all to be, I have this right, like everybody needs to be heard, and he's not letting people be heard.
Yeah.
That was righteous. Okay, losing what I want, what I have. My only claim to fame is that I was a former chair. I'm a peacock. Look at me, how great I am. And that's coming up later. I'll tell you that in a sec. Responsible. Where was I responsible when I feel this? Where am I responsible? I got absorbed in my own feelings. My feelings were hurt by him silencing me and yelling at me. I reacted and I took it personally. I felt wronged. I don't know. I didn't do so well in this one. I tried to be respectful.
No,
I got more and more angry.
Yeah.
And annoyed. Okay.
You didn't try to be respectful. You tried to win.
Yes, I had to be right. Okay, 6, what harm did I cause? Maybe I caused him a little stress.
Yes.
He was trying to run the
We
meeting.
don't need to spend much time on 6
Okay.
and 7 because
Okay.
those are just parking spots. So
Harming
1 to 8.
others was maybe I just made it uncomfortable for other board members, you know,
For
while they were
sure.
trying to have a meeting.
For
All right,
sure.
number 8, sir, list any fears. It's all about me. I'm not good for anything but being chair. All I'm going to find is abusive bosses. Why look for a job at all? Because I'll just find abusive men and bosses.
All right.
Character defects. Oh my gosh, I went through your list here. You name it: critical, judgmental, angry, intolerant, bitter, dominated by antagonistic, restless, pessimistic, resentful, grandiose, anxious,
So
planning.
you got a list there, and
You
don't
named
forget
it.
righteous.
All right. Harsh, maybe.
All right. So to give me a shot at number 10.
Why do I hold on to my resentment? Oh God. So I can be right. So I can be a victim of men who are bullies and carry that flag and make an excuse not to try to find a job. I've been unemployed for 1.5 years.
Oh, there you go.
I work in healthcare and I didn't want to work during the pandemic. Why look for a job when employers and men, just like the chair, will only be abusive? So what do I realize that my real role is not.
What's your role at the top, perceived role?
My perceived role was I was an abused board member.
Yes, and what's the truth at the bottom?
The truth at the bottom.
After you've gone through all of those questions and those insights that you had.
Is maybe I'm a person who has to be right. I don't think this is deep enough.
Well, maybe, but go ahead.
It's not deep enough, but a person who has to be right, the righteous one who upholds justice.
No, that's too much Joan of Arc.
Okay, sorry.
You're defending yourself.
Okay.
I want the breakthrough for you to see how unhealthy you are.
Oh shit! A victim. Sorry to say that word. A victim. I'm a victim of controlling and abusive men.
No.
Okay.
No, that's your fantasy and delusion.
God, I'm not a victim, and I'm not an abused board member. Maybe I'm not a compassionate person.
How about you're an abusive board member?
Oh no!
You're an out of control. All right. Self-centered, inconsiderate, arrogant board member on a good day.
Self-centered, arrogant. Oh my God. Abusive?
You are. You said you yelled at him. You were out of line. You went out of turn.
It was in the chat.
Stop bullying me. I don't care where it is. See how you defend yourself?
Yeah, okay. I will try to own that.
You're on the precipice of the truth, and it's tickling you, and that's why you're laughing.
All right. So I will work on this.
And you're also embarrassed by it.
Yeah, there's definitely, just to put it simply, this was all I had during the pandemic, was like, I know how to run a business meeting. I'm unemployed. There's nothing else going on. So I have to create drama. You
just don't know how to be a player in the sandbox.
Well, yeah. And I wrote, I'll just finish by saying, not letting go and letting God, let him learn at his own pace. Maybe his needing to learn how to run.
Your job is to get your eyes off of him and put them on yourself. You're a train wreck.
Okay. Oh my God. Thank you very much. I can't believe I just said thank you.
I won't always be blunt with everybody, but with you, I think you can handle it.
Yeah, I've been working with you for a couple of years. All right. I'm gonna thank you. I'll pray about it. I appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. No, that's good work. Good work. But that's, once you break it like that and you begin to see it and you even see your own resistance to the truth, then you can, it almost becomes fun and a game. And when you get over the embarrassment,
it's painful.
Initially it is. And then it's kind of like, oh my God, you're pathetic, Herb.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And so I would like to give the assignment. What I'd like you to do is to certainly do at least one column 4 for next week. Based on one of your column 3s, do one column 4. And then I hope you will participate here and ask questions about it, maybe go through it to see that it's confirmed or clarified or changed in some way that will be more helpful. So do at least one, maybe up to 3 of the column 4s on different people. So don't do a column 4 on the same column 3s. Do column 4 on 3 different column 3s, 3 different column 4s, for instance. And then pay attention to finishing up your column 3s if you're comfortable with doing column 3. I don't mean comfortable. I meant that you feel like you understand what you're doing, then proceed. And if you don't understand what you're doing, at least practice 1 or 2 of them and try to get a step guide or get into a little group that will help facilitate your finishing column 3. We're going to spend some time on column 3. We're going to spend some time on column 4. We're not rushing ahead. I'm not going to artificially drive this, but I want obviously at some point to move on, and we'll see how you guys are doing with it. All right, so let's pray this prayer of transformation, because that's really, we're in the heart of it now. We are in the heart of it. This is the transformational stuff. Column 3 and column 4 is where the major changes will happen. Please join me. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. And you can hear the turnaround in that, the turnaround from the self-centeredness to the other-centeredness. That's the whole point. And the thing is, we get to show up with our willingness and action, but the actual turning and the turning around, I believe, is done by the Spirit. That's certainly my experience with it. I was willing to turn. My experience was I was turned.